Professor Nitra to introduce Ivana and then start the talk.
First of all, very good afternoon to all present physically here and all others who are present online at different places here in India as well as Slovakia. It is a matter of great pleasure for me to have today with us as an expert scholar, Dr. Ivana Hostová, who is a prominent literary critic, a scholar of translation studies, and also a very significant notable translator. She is affiliated to the Department of Translation Studies at Constantine the Philosopher University in Nitra, Slovakia, and the Institute of Slovak Literature at the Slovak Academy of Sciences. Her academic work incorporates diverse theoretical frameworks, including eco-criticism, gender studies, sociology, political economy, psychoanalysis, critical theory, and post-humanism. As a translator into English, she primarily focuses on Slovak poets working in the modernist and post-conceptual traditions. Her English translation of the selection from the poetry of Nóra Ružičková, What Now Is Now Is Now, is to be published in 2025, that is this year itself, by Seagull Books. I am really very glad and I welcome you, madam, amongst all of us, and I make a humble request to you to please proceed for your talk. Thank you.
Thank you
very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your very kind introduction and for inviting me to talk about two topics which are very close to my heart and to which I have been devoting some 20 years of my work to now. These are Slovak literature and translation. So let me just start sharing my slides, if I manage. Just a second. Can you see my slides now?
Not yet, please. Yeah.
Not yet.
No.
Okay. Okay, so I hope this technical issue.
No problem. We are able to hear you very well, and we are able to see you also. So if it works,
yes,
fine.
but
Otherwise you can please proceed. No problem.
yes, but I wanted to share the slides as well, but it seems like I have not used this this platform yet, so it's new for me. Can you see my slides now?
Yes.
Yes, wonderful. Okay, great, wonderful. So the title of my presentation today is From Tatras to Text, and I want to start with explaining what the Tatras are. The Tatras are a mountain range in Slovakia. And why I titled my presentation in this way there is an easy answer for that. Slovak literature could be considered a young literature. Slovak Republic is a very young republic on its own. It was only established as a separate state in 1993. So that means Slovak feeling people before the establishment of Slovak Republic and during the times when Slovak language was not a literary language, needed some point to which they would adhere, needed something to define their identity. And the Tatras, very, very beautiful mountain range, became this point, a symbol of Slovak nation, of Slovak values, Slovak spirit, let's say. The Tatras were also thematized in literature. We are talking about a literature of national awakening, of course, not contemporary literature. We are talking about the times when Slovak literature was just about starting to understand that it probably is a separate, different literature with a separate, different development. And that was in the 18th and 19th centuries. So there is a short excerpt, just 2 lines from the poem by a romantic poet, Samochalúbka. The poem's title is Morho. It's from 1864, and was translated as Crush Him. It is really a nationalistic gesture, trying to call Slovaks to action, to mobilize, to somehow find it in themselves, to present themselves, to write their own poems, mostly at that point. It was translated by Sister Martina Tibor in 1976, which is an old translation, let's say. I will be talking about contemporary literature, but as an introduction, I chose these 2 lines, so I can read these. From Tatras crest, swift eagles plunge to the plains below, down from the craggy summits crowned with eternal snow. So this verticality, these eagles, these natural motives became something Romantic poets who also established Slovak as a literary language adhered to. So they took natural beauties with the Tatras as something very symbolic because of the height, because of the purity of air, because of being close to, I don't know, the heavens, let's say. So without separate statehood and economic power and political power, the nature was something that symbolized or helped Slovak literature to define itself. So also with these difficulties, like the literary language only in this form, in the present form, has only been used since 1843. That is a very short time. So there were, of course, languages used also for written text before that, but they were all sorts of mixed languages. There was the Czech language was used as a literary language, or Slovakized Czech language. Czech language is very close to Slovak language, and Czech Republic is a neighboring country. So naturally, Slovaks took a developed literary language, Czech language, and used it for their own purposes, changed some of the vocabulary and so on and so on. Of course, Latin during the humanism era, sometimes German. So if we want to speak about translations of Slovak literature, we would be happy to have a definition of Slovak literature. But that is a tricky issue. Strictly speaking, in a very narrow sense, we would only be speaking about a literature written since the mid 19th century or beginning of the or mid 18th century, sometimes with some exceptions. So, but we if we talk about Slovak literature as a literature created in a geographic space, or by ethnic Slovaks, then we are talking about literature which does have a longer history. So it would also be literature written in Latin, for example. So with the late independent statehood, the late independent statehood has all sorts of bearings on how much of the literature has been created, the ways it developed, and so on. So historically, Slovakia was part of Austria-Hungary or Hungarian Kingdom for a very long time. And Hungarian was the official language in Slovakia, in the Slovak part of Hungary, strictly speaking. And Hungarian is a very different language from Slovak language, which kind of impeded the development because Slovaks did not learn Hungarian thoroughly because they were in a separate, geographically separate part of Hungarian Kingdom. There was not much mixing. Also, those who did speak Hungarian in Slovakia were usually members of nobility. So general population would not speak the official language. And that presented significant problems to the development of literature. So, but then let's move into the 20th century when Slovakia became part of the Czechoslovak Republic, with the official language being Czech and Slovak. And that was a huge change for the opportunities to present Slovak literature in Slovak and in Slovakia. Of course, we are still not talking about attempts to internationalize or present Slovak literature in English, through English, all over the world, but in Slovak for Slovaks. So opportunities to publish, opportunities to develop their history of literature, to have separate criticism, publication platforms like magazines, that is crucial for the development of any literature. Then the 20th century, brief history, there was then during the Second World War, that this is nothing we are proud of, but Slovak Republic was a fascist state. But after the end of the Second World War, it again became part of Czechoslovakia, unfortunately. In 1948, there was a communist overthrowing, or they were official elections, but Slovakia was part of totalitarian regime. Czechoslovakia was socialist republic, which was totalitarian republic. So, and that lasted since 1948 until 1989, a very long time. So brief history, so that the background is important, I think, for presenting anything about Slovak literature, even also its translations. So, and now I've tried to make my presentation in a way, or to include as many resources as possible for further consultation, for further study. So I will present you with websites where you can reach Slovak literature in English translation, and with secondary resources. That means publications on in English. I mean, English language publications on English translations of Slovak literature, and also publications on Slovak literature as such, the history of Slovak literature. And this book, this is a very recent publication. This has just been published in March and is still not distributed in Europe, because McGill Queen's is a Canadian publishing house. It will be distributed all over the world in May, I think. So this is there are very few English language resources on Slovak literature as such, and this is a very huge accomplishment on which I had the opportunity to collaborate as well, because the last similar handbook of Slovak literature was published almost 30 years ago, some 25 years ago. So this is a book which can help anyone interested in Slovak literature acquaint themselves with not the whole 20th century and contemporary literature, but since mid-century, let's say. So it starts somewhere in 1956. As you can see, that's the first chapter. So I'm not going to go into great detail here. Suffice it to say that the second half of the 20th century in Slovak literature was strongly marked by the regime that was here. The lack of freedom of speech was very strict at certain points, but there were also periods of more liberal atmosphere, social atmosphere, and that was in the 1960s, or let's say 1956 until 1970. So my chapter is on contemporary poetry and experimental poetry and subversion, and I look at the past 3 decades. But let us move on. As I said, I want to provide you with resources, and the most comprehensive and up-to-date online and open access resource on Slovak literature in English translation is a separate website which is curated by Julia Sherwood and Magdalena Mullek. They're both Slovak expats. Julia lives in London, and Magdalena lives in Mexico, and it is a very well-built website which lists books, reviews of the translations, which also has some excerpts and interviews with authors, I think, and all sorts of materials. Also, in the resources section of the website, you can find spreadsheets with bibliographic data on translations of Slovak literature. There are 2 spreadsheets. One of them lists anthologies, and the other lists single author volumes. I highly recommend that you take a look at the website if you are interested in the topic and in Slovak literature as such. So let me move on to translations overview. I prepared a few data, a few charts as well. So the first translation was published in 1832, and the numbers are, as you can see, the independent statehood really does make a very huge difference. So since 1832 until 1993, approximately 60 volumes of containing Slovak literature were translated into English. Of course, you would not be expecting that many books to be published in the 19th century in general, but certainly in the second half of the 20th century, the number might have been a lot higher if concentrated efforts were being made, which they weren't. With the establishment of the separate Slovak Republic, these concentrated efforts started being made. And as you can see, during the past 3 decades, approximately 115 to 200 volumes containing translations of Slovak literature into English were published. The number can vary based on criteria, because you can either include or exclude festival booklets or various international anthologies curated and edited, for example, in the United States with a focus on new European poetry, let's say. So that's why the number is not there's not just one number for that. So now I have been researching the translations of Slovak poetry in the past 30 years. I'm just about to publish a monograph on the subject. So this is my focus period, or the period on which I focus. So that's after the fall of state socialism in 1989. That is why I also present data on this period. But this is these publications, the number of translations you can see in the chart, in the figure. These are all the books, I mean, fiction and poetry. So these are numbers for all books published in English translation in this given period. As you can see, there is a steady rise during the 3 decades. I calculated average number of books published in English translation for these 4 temporal intervals. So you can see the line does go up. And when we consult the numbers for individual years, there's some exceptions, like 1998. There you can see that quite a few books were published in that year, 7 books, which is quite a lot. Slovakia is not a very populous country, so. So 7 books is quite a high number, and the explanation behind this number, for example, is that in that year Slovakia, or one of the Slovak cultural institutions, organized a literary or poetry festival, and at that occasion they published all these books, I think, were published at the occasion of this literary festival. So these exceptions, with a small country, one event can make big changes. That is interesting to research, of course. So, but let's say this 1998 with 7 published book translations of Slovak literature into English. These none of these books can be really reached over international catalogs in libraries. If you consult WorldCat, which I did, which is a meta catalog of libraries all over the world, none of these books can be located in it. Why? Well, if you publish an English translation of Slovak literature in Slovakia, the distribution does not cross the borders of the Slovak Republic. So that's why it is important to take a look at places of publications, because only with publishing with a publisher which does have international circulation, does have international distribution, the translations can be reached, can be really do the job that they are supposed to do, because they are supposed to tell the world that there is this literature and that it might have something interesting to say. So these are numbers from my research. That means these are poetry collections, right? The numbers for fiction are slightly different, but it's just an illustration. So basic trends in publishing of translations after the fall of state socialism as follows. So we can really see a sharp increase in the number of published translations, both fiction and poetry, after 2010. And this is largely due to the activities of one person, really, and that is Julia Sherwood, whom I mentioned before, who co-curates the specialized website. Julia Sherwood was born in Czechoslovakia in 1954 and was forced to emigrate during totalitarian era in 1978. She comes from a Jewish family, which was persecuted during the Second World War and was persecuted also during the state socialism. Her parents were cultural workers, were film and other culture work. So she had to flee. She fled Slovakia because she was not allowed to study, for example, at a university. And for all that energy that accumulated in this wonderful ambassador of Slovak literature in international space resulted in the fact that Slovak literature is gaining visibility. Julia was able to create a wonderful and living network of translators, literary critics, editors, publishers. She organizes events, readings, book presentations. She and her husband, Peter, co-translated approximately 20 books of Slovak literature into English alone. So, but her work also encompasses other translations because she contacts translators. She contacts, for example, also literary critics in Slovakia to consult which books might be interesting to translate. So she just has done an enormous amount of work in this field. One of the things she managed also to do is to establish a collaboration with Calcutta-based Seagull Books, which subsequently founded the edition, the Slovak List, which is a sustainable way of presenting Slovak literature in English translation. And it is a huge step for Slovak literature in English translation and international circulation. So, but she also promotes Slovak literature over various other channels. For example, she made a series of podcasts which can be reached through the link I list here. I can, after I finish my presentation, I can share my slides with you if you wish. So, I also, she also interviewed me about my work on translations, on reflection of translations of Slovak poetry into English. So there is one episode also with me there. Now, in the next part of my lecture, I would like to tell you a few things about, or I would like to present a few contemporary Slovak authors who have been translated into English and who will, whose books, new books, very often are translated into English very soon after they are published in Slovak. With that, having said that, I also have to add a footnote here. Most of the books translated into English were subsidized by a Slovak. It's a fund aimed at promoting Slovak literature in translations, old translations. It's called Slolia. And with events going on in Slovakia right now, perhaps you have heard of cultural difficulties and political difficulties we're having here. this fund has actually it's not been stopped, but there might be differences in how the books are subsidized, and the continuation might have a hiatus now in this development of visibility of Slovak literature in English translation. We will be hoping this situation will not last too long. But okay, so end of footnote. Fiction writers, will briefly talk about Ivana Dobrakovová, who does not live in Slovakia, but who writes in Slovak. She's also a translator from Italian, and she lives in Italy. I will talk about Balla, Uršuľa Kovalyk. Oh, she's there twice. Okay, Jana Beňová, Jana Juráňová, and I will talk about two poets, Mila Haugová and Mária Ferenčuhová. So Ivana Dobrakovová, she's a relatively young writer and translator, born in 1982, based in Turin, and translates also from French, not only Italian. For example, the worldwide successful worldwide author Elena Ferrante, and her books available in English translation include Belvy and Mothers and Truckers, and both were translated by Julia and Peter Sherwood. So here I have a short description of her work. So her from a literary critic, William Nadoškaj, her books often deal with all sorts of mental disorders, or all sorts of marginalized mental states or difficult emotions, and she digs really deep into the psyche of a contemporary person living in this world, and she addresses topics like inability to conform to the rules of the external world, and her characters experience states of anxiety and paranoia. It is a very sensitive take on an individual, so it's very psychologically very deep. So this is a very short excerpt. I can just read this one. I will not read excerpts with the remaining ones. So this has something to do with childhood trauma, about father, alcoholic father, who would abuse his family, and which would leave marks on the soul of the children, of course. And this is a passage which describes his coming home drunk and banging his head in the lift. That stain has remained to this day in our fancy block of flats, complete with a garage, fireplace, and a view of Austria. And the stain in the lift. The lift might be about 40 years old now. It has no internal doors. It's one of those where you can see the floors pass by. One night, Dad was coming home, pissed as a newt, and wanted to lean on the wall. He leaned his head against the floor passing by. He hit his forehead, drawing blood, leaving a long, dark brown stain between the first and second floors. So as you can see, the stain is also a symbolic stain in the soul of the child. So Uršuľa Kovalyk, a slightly older writer and playwright as well. She also has several books available in English translation. Her topics are she focuses on feminist thought and feminist take on things, and just feminist vision of the world. it is in Slovakia, it is very specific because feminism only reached Slovakia in the 1990s after the fall of the Iron Curtain. It was not, Slovakia was not familiar with first or second wave feminism, which took place in the first wave, of course, very long time ago, the second wave in the 1970s. So because of the isolation in which Slovak cultural space was held during the totalitarian era, feminism was non-existent. So therefore, writers and cultural public has to come to terms with had to come to terms with feminism only very recently, so the past 30 years. So that is why also it is still a very lively topic, of course. So so she thematizes corporeality, which goes with her feminist views, strong emotional bonds between women as well. So, and this is a dreamy passage, a passage from a dream. So another key Slovak writer available in English translation is Irena Brežná, who is an emigre who emigrated to Switzerland in 1968. So she emigrated as at the moment when you might be familiar with the Prague Spring. It was a revolutionary period when liberal forces were starting to be strong in Czechoslovakia. But in 1968, the Soviet Union decided that it was too much, and they sent troops of the Warsaw Pact to silence the revolution, or not the revolution, the cultural revolution. So and again, since that time, the totalitarian state was very strong again. So that is why many people emigrated just after the invasion of the troops. So, and Irena Brežná emigrated in 1968. She actually writes in German. She does not write in Slovak language. She emigrated when she was 18. So her linguistic identity was marked by her personal trajectory. And one of the podcasts I mentioned also has her as a guest, and there is an interview with her about her writing her experience and so on. So there is one book available in English. Now, I did not list those authors and those books which are only listed in anthologies. So short stories, in various anthologies, I only list here separate books. So The Thankless Foreigner, which was translated from German, of course, by Ruth Ahmedzai Kemp. So Irena Brežná's work is very interesting because it has been able to describe the situation of living in a totalitarian country and switching to a country, democratic country, and she has been able to capture the differences in thought on all sorts of levels, really. So a lot of her writing does have this foreign lens, or the lens of a foreigner. So she still is somehow between the cultures, although she writes in German, has lived in Switzerland since 1968. There is still that part of her identity and history which remembers her childhood and adolescence spent in Slovakia. Another key Slovak writer is Jana Juráňová, She is also a co-founder of a feminist cultural education and publishing organization Aspect, and her books are also immersed in feminist ideals, values, and so on. And this book, Ilona, My Life with a Bard, is actually a book thematizing a Slovak, the wife of a Slovak writer, Ilona, who is also a cultural worker. But she, from the feminist point of view, she describes the difficult conditions under which women in patriarchal society in the early 20th century lived, let's say, or tried to also be to fulfill their own ambitions and dreams. So under these restricted conditions where women were not would not normally be studying, or not often, and would not have jobs and so on. So this is a short description of her work. She disrupts traditional gender stereotypes and national myths as well. So Slovak Republic, or Slovak part of the Czechoslovak Republic, and the national awakening of which I was speaking was to a great extent boys' club. So it was to a great extent it was patriarchal. So she provides a corrective to that, or she reflects on that. Is an excerpt from her book. And another writer I want to briefly introduce is Balla. He does have a first name, but he doesn't use it in his publications. His name is Vladimir, but he goes under Balla. And his identity, as with every writer I mentioned, is also somewhat complicated. He comes from Nové Zámky, which is a part of which is located in the part of Slovakia where with a large Hungarian minority. As I mentioned, Hungarian is a very different language from Slovak, and so on. And he also has some Hungarian parts in his identity. So again, it's a very, very interesting point of view, or the background of the author. So quite a few, and he's a key author, as you can see, also from the list of translations. So 4 books have been translated by Balla. That's Among the Ruins, Dead, Big Love, In the Name of the Father. And 2 of them were translated by David Short, and 2 of them were translated by Julia and Peter Sherwood. So we might call his writing style postmodern. He does play with intertextuality, and he blends the comic and the contemplative, which might also be understood as a feature of postmodern writing. And he also, partly his writing is based on his own life, or some parts, because he works in bureaucratic profession, so he also thematizes that. And there is this excerpt. And the last fiction writer I want to mention is Jana Beňová, who is also a poet and journalist. And she there are 2 books that were translated into English, both by Janet Livingstone, and she captures the atmosphere, or in some of her writing, she has been able to capture the atmosphere and the cultural circumstances and of Bratislava as the capital city of Slovakia. So this is something, one point about her writing. And now I want to mention two poets. Mila Haugová, who is the most widely translated Slovak poet, and not only into English, but there are many translations into German. She also translates from German, from the German language. She also translates from English, but she's more leaning towards the German-speaking world. So she was, again, her background is complicated, as with the history of the region is complicated. She was born not in Slovakia, but in Hungary, in Budapest, and now she lives in central Slovakia. And there are two books available in English translation. Both, I forgot to state the name of the translator, but it's James Sutherland-Smith. So both of the books were published by ARC Publications, a UK-based press, and translated by James Sutherland-Smith, who works with his wife, Viera Sutherland-Smith, on translations. So, and I actually wrote quite a lot on the poet, on the translations of Mila Haugová as well. My dissertation thesis was partly about her work as well and her translations of Sylvia Plath. So I took the liberty of quoting myself here. So she really is a key Slovak poet, living key Slovak poet. So this is one of the poems translated by James Sutherland-Smith. It's from the book Disappearance of Angels. As you can see, she uses brackets, and her writing combines deep mythology rooted in mostly European sources, but she also works with feminine, very strong feminine motives, and also her poetics is to a great extent fragmentary, experimental, and probably a little postmodern, although she has been called surrealist. So there are these features of her poetics. And the last name from among the Slovak authors that I want to mention is the poet Mária Ferenčuhová, whose tidal events are available in English translation. She's also a translator from French, and her recent books deal with issues like illness, cancer, with the body, and she's also a film critic, and that part of her professional background is also reflected in the way she writes. She uses techniques which might be connected with film, montage, cut, close-up. So I also copied one poem by her. And as this presentation is on translations, the key actors with this regard are certainly translators themselves. I've already talked about Julia Sherwood and her husband Peter Sherwood, but then most prolific translators include David Short, Janet Livingstone, Jonathan Gresty, who is the only fiction translator based in Slovakia, Magdalena Mullek, Charles Sabados, and the two poetry translators are both based in Slovakia, James Sutherland-Smith and John Minahane. So I've already introduced Julia, and I also mentioned all her wonderful activities. She has also been given various prizes by Slovak institutions, cultural institutions, for the promoting of Slovak literature and English translation. Her husband, with whom she co-translates, and this co-translation is she is the main translator in this collaboration, and Peter is a reader of her translation and who edits her translation, with whom she also consults the wordings and so on and so on. So, but Peter Sherwood is also a prolific translator from Hungarian, and he was born in Hungary and fled the communist regime as well, earlier than Julia, of course. Yes. Okay, so they translated almost 20 books as of now, from Slovak into English. Then David Short, who is a graduate, or he was born in the UK, but also studied in Czechoslovakia. That is why he has the knowledge of the language, of the Czech language and Slovak language. So he also taught the Czech and Slovak language in London, and he's the translator of Balla, for example. So then there is Janet Livingstone, who's based in the USA but lived in Slovakia for 14 years, also a prolific translator. Then an extremely prolific translator, Magdalena Mullek, who was born in Slovakia, which was still Czechoslovakia then. Okay. But she's based in Mexico and translates a lot, frequently. Then the translator of poetry, James Sutherland-Smith, born in Great Britain, but who came in Slovakia as during the Velvet Revolution, which is the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1989, and still lives in Slovakia. And he is the most prolific translator of Slovak poetry into English. Then Irish-born John Minahane, who has done a great job promoting Slovak poetry in the UK. Has some of his translations were also published in UK-based presses, like this Slovak Spring by Ladislav Novomeský, and he cooperates with Slovak literary institutions. And I have also had the pleasure to cooperate with John, who is also a wonderful person to work with. So now to publishers of English translations of Slovak literature. As you can see, many of them are based in the UK, with an approximately equal number of them based in the USA. There is one publisher based in Prague, that's Twisted Spoon Press, which, however, does have international distribution. And there is the Seagull Books, based in India, with the Slovak List I mentioned. So translation strategies differ from case to case and are very different when it comes to the strategies used while translating poetry and translating fiction. So, for example, translating in pairs is very, very frequent in poetry, because to translate poetry, you not only have to have a conduct of the two languages, but you also have to have this special aesthetic sense for poetry, which is in comparison to what you need to have in usually for translating fiction, is not that found that often among people. So translating in pairs would be a thing that is done when dealing with poetry. And translating solo is frequent in fiction. So what I noticed as I was looking into, I just quickly go through the slides. Yeah, I'm nearly finished, so I'm watching my time. So what I noticed during my research is that, and I also explicitly asked about that. I inquired about editing, because when you translate books into Slovak, most usually you would have a certain step in the translation after the translator was finished with the book. That would be a comparative editing, or we would be expecting it to happen with high quality translations, with high quality literature. With translating Slovak literature into English, this does not happen. This is something that is not viewed as a necessary step for the production of a quality output. When I do translations, not only because English is my second language, but also because I know how many omissions or misunderstandings can happen during the translating process, I always ask for someone to do a comparative editing for my translations. So, strategies of promoting translated Slovak literature. There are specialized websites, the one I've already mentioned several times, but also websites aimed at promoting translated literature as such. For example, there is this online magazine Asymptote, for which Julia Sherwood was one of the editors, and she would be bringing Slovak pieces into that magazine. But there are also different other platforms, of course. Book fairs, festivals, tours, presentations, promoting literature on social networks. There's a special group on one of the social networks managed also by Julia Sherwood, and their podcasts. And this is just a very brief listing of resources on which address the question of English translations of Slovak literature. As you can see, one of them is my paper, but there, and I only listed English language resources. So, and there are several other papers, not that much, but these are the two of them can be accessed online. So, and all three of them can be. Yes, really good. When you Google the first one, you will also find it. And now, just the very last slide from me. This is a list of representative anthologies of Slovak literature. For someone who's not acquainted with A literature, an anthology is a very good first step to do so. And yes. So these are the anthologies you can consult. Okay, so thank you. We'll now stop my presentation. Since that was last slide, and if you have any.
Thank you very much for a very scholarly presentation on translation activities which are going on in Slovakia, and in particularly from Slovak to English. And you have been yourself contributing a lot, and particularly in the field of poetry and fiction. There would be questions, but I initiate the discussion. We came in contact with English because English was the language of our rulers for a pretty long time. What is the nature of relationship between Slovakia and a lot of translation is taking place from Slovak English. But it just done in language.
Yes. So in totalitarian era, which I mentioned, which ended in 1989, English was not such a dominant language. English was not taught very frequently at schools because we were interested, or we were part of the Eastern Bloc. We were made to learn Russian, but also there were other languages. But English, the hegemonic status that English already had, probably, or acquired during the 20th century, was not felt in Slovakia. When it started to be felt was after this 1989, and English for Slovaks became a language through which they could get access to jobs, because they could travel suddenly. They were not allowed to travel into richer countries, let's say, where they could earn more. There is one book, actually, I really liked. It is called Buying into English. So in the 1990s, Slovaks were very optimistic about English as a vehicle, as a tool, and as something that would help them enter the world. So they would be taking courses and paying for the courses, and they were hoping that the access to the language and the possession of the language would improve their economic position, political position, cultural position, and so on and so on. Which of course, in reality, was not what really took place. I also took a look at the numbers for not only for translating Slovak literature into English, but for what languages are translated into Slovak. And with the commercial book market, nowadays you would have approximately 90 or 80% of the books are translations from English. So Slovakia became a market for English. So that is, but at the same time, it is a language of international communication, thanks to which we can communicate, we can talk, and we realize that in order to be heard, we need to be using this international language. There is more, in general, there is positive attitude towards English. Not many people are realizing that this is really cultural colonization as well, right? With the number of translations, with the flooded infosphere, and so on and so on. So if I were to guess, if you asked Slovaks in the streets, what do you think about English, they would still be saying that it's very important to learn English. They would not be addressing the question of cultural colonization here.
Thank you very much. I'll let others have questions, because I will certainly have one or two more questions. But
is the beginners like us. There's no question as such, but just a little thing that I would like to know is that along with translation, what happens is we also look into the antiquity. What you spoke about is from, say, 19th century onwards, whatever translations into English from Slovak are available. So can we trace this antiquity in case of Slovakian literature through the translations available? Because one way to choose a text to translate, justify, is also that how old it is and how worthwhile also to preserve it. So is there something called folk Slovakian folk literature, which has been translated, first of all, of course, recorded and then translated into English? Please.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. These older anthologies, the anthology I quoted at the beginning of my presentation, they do. It's not the period I focus on, but I did take a look at what they present, what they contain, and there are also folk poems, ballads. They're mostly so. There is a selection, but nowadays older Slovak literature is rarely translated. Although I know about one novel from the 18th century which has just been translated and is going to be published. And as to how to preserve the antiquity or to the character of the older sounding language, it very much depends on the translator, I would say. From what the translations I know, I deal with poetry, so that's what I know about. And I spoke about two translators of poetry, that John Minahane. John Minahane has extensive experience with Irish literature, and in some way, I think that it must be somehow connected with this ancient literature, old literature with long history, has been translated in a way, like as if translated, into his ability to create a kind of patina. Because he does translate also some older poetry, like a century old. We're not talking about, Upanishads, or we're still. It's a very, very, very young literature still. But yes, it depends on individual translators and how they deal with the text and how they can feel the language and their ability to express it also in English.
Thank you.
Please.
There is a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. There is a question from our student here at Constantine the Philosopher University. Maybe can you come closer so they can hear?
What are the most significant amendments made by artificial intelligence in translation of poems, specifically poems, not fiction?
Thank you. So in general, I have not looked into the topic in a very scholarly way, let's say. But from my own experience with translating poetry, I sometimes look for a naturally sounding phrasing in translations, or sometimes the sentences even in poetry are sentences which are more prose-like or fiction-like sentences, and there you do need to have certain degree of sounding natural. And yes, sometimes I consult with ChatGPT, but it's just the natural phrasing. I used to do consultations with Google, just the search engine, so it's pretty much the same for me. I have not heard of any translators into English of poetry, of Slovak poetry, who do use AI, because it is also a generational thing. And both of these translators, the most prolific ones, are just not the generation who would be using AI tools. They're a generation who likes doing their work in a more manual way, and so I do not have general remarks on that, but yes. I hope I answered at least partly your question.
Well, I wanted to ask if English will have a bigger influence to Slovak language and Slovak poetry and literature in the future because of the different words and all that kind of stuff. Do you think it will influence also the translation and the Slovak literature in general?
Thank you. I definitely think it has already started. I mean, the sentence structure might be changing, but what you still do have is when you publish. Now I'm talking about Slovak books in Slovak and the influence of English on Slovak language, right? So what you still do have is you have editors. So a young author who's in Slovak might be pretty much influenced by English, because I don't have the statistics at hand, but educated young and youngish people in Slovakia read a lot in English. So their language is influenced by this dual existence, let's say dual linguistic existence, but they do use editors who also are very often older generations. So the language of these older generations, I guess, is less influenced by the English because they don't live in English that much as the younger generations. They don't read in English. They rely on the Czech language or other languages they speak. So there is a certain corrective, but at the same time, I have a friend, a poet, and he also he's just published his first book of fiction as well. And he's slowly moving into English as such. He's stopping writing in Slovak at all, because with the very small audience you have in Slovak, you reach, let's say, okay, some numbers. How many books of poetry? I mean, how many copies are published? What do you think? Or how many people would read a collection of your book? That would be a few hundred. So yeah, people are moving into English in general as well. Thank you.
Yes, Rutvi.
Warm greetings. Firstly, thank you, madam. It was a wonderful session. My question is, am I audible?
I can hear you, yes, but
Yes.
So
continue.
my question is, with regard to Slovak literature and its translations in English, what are the gaps that the current translators need to explore and address?
I didn't really catch that. Could you repeat it or rephrase it?
Works, perhaps, which need to be focused on, which have been overlooked for decades, because we talk about how through these decades there have been various texts that have been explored. But then there must be something which needs to be focused on. So what is that gap which needs to be filled, and perhaps the current translators and scholars can pick up and work on that?
So gap in the translations?
Yeah,
Gap.
that have not been translated and that need to be addressed to with regard to this case.
Mm-hmm. So if I were to talk about what I think that should be translated and has not been translated, and as my field is poetry, there is one very significant poet who has no book translations into English at all, and he's a poet who started publishing in the 1960s, which were those period of liberalization. Then he was banned from publishing. He could not publish a book for 10 years, and but he has been also collaborating with afterwards with a songwriter, and he's published perhaps 30 collections, and so this is something. It's all these efforts that have been done in the past 10 or 15 years are continuing, but there are so many gaps. The whole translation landscape is very fragmentary. So the name of the poet is Ivan Štrbka, also a dear friend of mine. I hope I understood the question, because there is like something with probably my speaker, which made it hard for me to understand. So sorry if my answer was out of.
Hello, hi, thank you for the lecture. I just wanted to ask, has there ever been a demand for Slovak literature in the market? Sorry. Like, I can imagine that someone will read short stories from the Slovak writers, because even when I go to a bookstore, when I'm looking for short stories, it doesn't matter who it's written from or what language it is in, because it's in Slovak or in English, so it's easier for me to pick. Or for example, we have some famous playwrights as well, either from historical point of view or the current point of view. There are famous playwrights in Slovakia who maybe aren't translated into English, but they're definitely played in other countries. But has there ever been a demand just for the Slovak literature, either short stories or, for example, literature for the masses, per se? Like, we have Dominik Dan, who's kind of like a famous writer for the masses, because everyone likes to read his horror short stories and whatever he writes, etc. Because he is kind of like this, not like a market, but he's fitting into this criteria. He's writing like drama fiction, so everyone who likes reading drama fiction, they go to Dominik Dan. Is it like, for example, like anyone in Slovakia that could be translated because of the criteria they're writing in? For example, fantasy as well is well known in all the global market. So that's I don't know what I wanted to ask, but that's my question, basically.
Thank you. Yes, the demand is a very. Perhaps you could turn off the microphone because it's making noises. Okay, thank you. So yes, the demand question is a very good one. I was at a conference in Bristol, a conference on small languages or small literatures in translation, in English translation or in translation in general, but I don't remember. But there was this scholar, Czech scholar, Ondřej Wimmer there, translation scholar, and he coined two terms: export driven and demand driven translation, or motivations behind translation. So 99% of Slovak literature is export driven. It is a literature we want to present. I genuinely have heard about very little genuine demand. What does happen though is that when cultural representatives from various institutions go to book fairs and these large international book fairs, the publishers are looking for new ideas, for new things. So yes, there is this demand. Of course, isn't never like a very huge wave of demands, but sometimes they are looking for things which Slovak literature still has not been able to produce, there is very little queer literature, for example, in Slovakia, and these are topics which are very highly visible and highly there is a demand for that, let's say. There is like in cultural exchange, in like with cultures which do not publish only 3% of their book production of their translations, because English is a very specific language. Only 3% of all the publications published in English are translations. The situation is very different in France, in Germany. So there is greater demand in the cultures which accentuate translations and are interested in cultural diversity. Now, there is very little demand for English translations, really. And Dominic Dunn or Karika or anyone, this is just one of many others. It might be marketed.
So, may I have the question? Now, I changed the question. My question now is that in India is a very big country with so many languages which are recognized as national languages. There are about 22. When we translate from one language to another Indian language, then by and large, we do not face very complex situation. It is much easy to go from one language to another. And hardly there is a need to provide a glossary, even though food habits, other things are different yet. What is the situation in Europe? And with reference to particularly Slovak and English. When you translate from this to that language or the other way around, then does it become cross-cultural translation? And do you face the problems of untranslatability or you don't?
Thank you. Well, it probably mostly depends on whether it's contemporary writing or older writing, because contemporary writers are living in this transcultural world, let's say, which is in a globalized world, and then the translatability or is very easy to achieve, really, because as there is this term coined born translated novel, or I'm not sure about the exact wording, but it's like someone writes their own work with the knowledge that it might be translated, it should be, or he or she would wish for the text to be translated. So this internationalization of writing might be taking place, and that would mean that cultural specifics might not be that propose such a problem. Linguistic specifics, perhaps, but I have not really encountered that many obstacles. Certainly within Europe, in Europe there are Slovak language as a Slavic language would have easiest translatability into Slavic languages. So the Polish, Czech language, and so on, in the Slavic group of languages. Then into different languages, it would pose greater difficulties, but untranslatability is not something that we often struggle with. We struggle with not being able to reach readers and so on. But perhaps it's not something that is addressed because we are so eager to export. We want to be user-friendly, and therefore we do not pose that many obstacles to translation. But that would just be my, let's say, informed opinion or conjectures, not based on wider research.
Very much. At all there, then we can have one more question, last question, because our time is coming up.
So, can you hear me?
Yeah. please.
Okay, thanks. So, as you have mentioned in your presentation, that there are like 7 or 8 books are translated into English approximately, and my question is, what are the factors that influence this number, like external, like popularity of the Slovakia or availability of translators, or like internal, like political situation, or if there are factors, or it's just like a natural number and it's growing with no factors influencing it?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I would say that the main factor with this change, the growth, was the political situation in the country, which changed after the. In the 1990s, Slovakia was a very problematic democracy. So there was not. It was viewed with a certain hesitation internationally. But after the accession to the EU in 2004, travel and the wide travel and the learning of the languages, so step by step, all these factors contributed to the higher number of translations. But as I repeated several times in my lecture, it's also the activity of this one individual actor, Julia Sherwood, who has like caused 50 book translations, let's say, together, because she has translated 20, and then she has managed to address translators. She has actually she's seeking, she's organizing it, managing it. So it's a combination of factors, but you have to have a necessary degree of some kind of freedom, let's say, or the basic conditions met in the home country, and then you do have to have an ambassador. So if with this, and there is just one ambassador for Slovak literature, unfortunately. Also, the problem with the low demand springs from the fact that Slovak literature does not have a single name which is internationally known. If there was a single name from, let's say, the early 20th century or mid 20th century, who would be a dissident or someone, Czech literature does have such names. Slovak literature does not have a figure through which it could be exported as an item. So this is part of the struggle. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you very much, Dr. Ivana. On behalf of my Department of English, all my colleagues and students, I convey my heartfelt gratitude to you for a very good talk on translation. And we really came to know something very significant about the translation activity which is taking place between Slovak and English. I also thank everybody, and particularly Mária, for making this interaction a reality through her endeavor. I thank all the students of the department there in Nitra and everybody else who is present online. Thank you very much.
And I also thank you for inviting me and for your attention and wonderful questions. Thank you. So, goodbye.